Welcome to Everything Casual, bringing you original football casual videos from the golden era of the 80s and 90s, right up to current day. Football away day stories and historic clashes between football firms. Subscribe so you don't miss out. We upload videos every week. There are a few games and seasons one could point to in order to understand the history of this particular rivalry, but one that sticks out is the end of the 74-75 First Division season. Chelsea and Spurs were near the bottom of the Division 1 table and desperate to stay up. With just a few games remaining in the campaign, the two sides met at White Hart Lane, each in need of a win to stay up. The intensity of the clash and the acrimony it gave rise to remain an indelible part of the history between these two London clubs. The clashes among rival fans spilled out onto the pitch and took what was already a tense affair and plunged it into violence. The incidents among fans at that game are still talked about to this day and underpin at least some of the lingering hostility of the two sets of supporters. In the spring of 1975, two of London's fiercest football rivals met at White Hart Lane. Tottenham Hotspur versus Chelsea. But what unfolded that day went far beyond the game. Police were overwhelmed, the pitch was stormed, and English football was left reeling. This is the story of the violent clash between Spurs and Chelsea on April 19th, 1975, a riot that still echoes through football history. The mid-70s were a turbulent time in Britain. The economy was struggling, unemployment was rising, and for many working-class young men, football terraces weren't just about supporting a team, they were battlegrounds. This was the era of the firms, of the terraces, of tribal loyalty, and no rivalry was more intense than Tottenham Hotspur and Chelsea. Both clubs were in trouble, on the brink of relegation. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and that pressure spilled over. On April 19, 1975, over 51,000 fans packed into White Hart Lane. But trouble started long before kick-off. Reports say Chelsea's firm, including young lads of what become years later the Headhunters, were out in numbers. Spurs' own hardcore support, the beginnings of what would later be known as the Yid Army, weren't backing down. Tensions were already high from the reverse fixture at Stamford Bridge. Now it was boiling point. As fans entered the ground, fights erupted on the terraces, and then, before a ball had even been kicked, hundreds spilled onto the pitch. What happened next shocked even the police. Mounted units tried to regain control. Officers on foot were overwhelmed. Fans from both clubs fought running battles on the pitch. The match was delayed. And, in one now iconic moment, Tottenham goalkeeper Pat Jennings was kicked by a Chelsea supporter as he attempted to calm the situation. There were reports of knives, coins and makeshift weapons being used. One fan later said, "It wasn't a football match that day, it was a war zone." The police eventually cleared the pitch. The game went ahead. But the violence didn't stop at the final whistle. Clashes continued outside the ground, all the way down to Seven Sisters. When the football finally began, it almost felt secondary. Tottenham took control. Steve Perryman opened the scoring. Alfie Conn added a second. Spurs won 2-0. The victory helped them survive. Chelsea would be relegated. But that day is remembered far more for what happened off the pitch than on it. The press went wild. "Mob rule at White Hart Lane," screamed one headline. Another read, "Savages storm the game, police lose control." The FA was furious. Questions were raised in Parliament. How had football lost its grip? How had things come to this? The 1975 Spurs-Chelsea riot became a turning point, not just in their rivalry, but in the way football violence was viewed by the public. It wasn't just about a few lads having a scrap anymore. It was organised, dangerous, and escalating. From this point on, the Chelsea Headhunters would grow into one of the most feared hooligan firms in England in years to come. Was this incident the inspiration? Tottenham's support would become infamous in their own right. The riot of 1975 lit a fuse that burned throughout the rest of the decade. London derbies became high-risk events. Police tactics had to change. Stadiums became fortresses. And in time, firm culture became a way of life for thousands of young men. Many who were there that day never forgot it. Some were proud. Some were ashamed. But all agreed. It was one of the worst scenes they'd ever witnessed. Today, football has changed. All see to stadiums, surveillance, strict bans. But on that day in April 1975, White Hart Lane became a battlefield. Tottenham versus Chelsea wasn't just a match. It was a warning. A signal that football hooliganism in England had reached a dangerous new level. And for those who remember it, it was a day that would never be forgotten. I have made a whole video on the rivalry between these two clubs, but that is more modern day, between the Headhunters and Yid Army, so have a flick through my channel and you will see that video there. It's from the perspective of football lads from both sides. Proper football lads too. It also has footage of naughty battles. Anyway, back to 1975. Now, I don't know how true this is, but legendary Spurs goalkeeper Pat Jennings was reportedly kicked across the shins by a Chelsea supporter during this chaotic moment, and Jennings hit the fan back. If anyone can officially confirm or deny that in the comment section, then please do so. The kick out. The kick apparently occurred not during play, but before kick-off, when chants of violence and early clashes were already underway. As the referee attempted to restore order by bringing players onto the pitch, Jennings was caught in the melee, attempting to act as a calming presence. But a fan's kick turned the gesture into a confrontation. This is what one Spurs lad that was actually there had to say. This is a first-person witness account, and the following are all his own words. I remember a massive Chelsea mob got held up by the constabulary at Liverpool Street that day, came out at Bruce Grove to be given the news the gates were shut and to turn around and head home, routed a Tottenham collection outside the corner pin, hung around, bumped into another Chelsea mob coming down from Seven Sisters, ambled around the ground twice, dealing decisively with Spud all-comers. No doubt that Chelsea got a good hiding in the ground, but as many Spuds got weighed in outside. This is what another Spurs lad had to say, again. It's all his own words. The worst violence I ever witnessed was the 1975 relegation decider between Spurs and Chelsea at White Hart Lane. Officially only 51,000 inside the lane, but estimated closer to 60,000. Chelsea boot boys got battered all the way to the lane and on the pitch twice when the game had to be stopped, and afterwards. Horrible, horrible, lovely scenes of battered Chelsea rent boys everywhere. Spurs won 2-0 to send them down, which was nice also. And this is what the Telegraph newspaper had to say about the violent clash. Both clubs were crippled by debt incurred by building new stands at a time of drastically plunging attendances, and with 3 matches to go, Spurs were 20th, 3rd from bottom in the 22nd team First Division, and Chelsea a point ahead in 19th. The racism of a section of National Front-influenced Chelsea supporters had yet to spread so virulently that it manifested itself in the anti-Semitic chanting and hissing that tainted subsequent meetings, but the violence that became prevalent over the next few years made its first major impact on the fixture that tense spring afternoon. The kick-off was delayed by a pitch invasion by more than 1,000 fans, and mounted police took so long to assert control that the Tottenham goalkeeper, Pat Jennings, took a painful kick across the shins from a Chelsea supporter when the referee brought the players onto the field in an attempt to appeal to the combatants' better natures. Taunting continued and fighting resumed at the end of the match, around the stadium and in the fertile ambush country of the Long March back to Seven Sisters Station. This is what a Chelsea fan had to say. The 1974-75 season was one in which Spurs and Chelsea fought out a bitter battle against relegation from Division 1. Coming into the game, Spurs were in the relegation zone and Chelsea were 1 point ahead of them. Spurs ultimately won 2-0. Chelsea could not win either of their remaining 2 games and were ultimately relegated from the First Division, with Tottenham staying up via a solitary point. Whilst Chelsea's relegation was obviously a hammer blow to bragging rights between the 2 clubs, arguably the basis for the rivalry took place with the unsavoury off-the-pitch activities. Although Chelsea were only in the same division as Tottenham for 1 season until 1984, the rivalry between the 2 clubs' fans set the tone for future confrontations. Everyone seems to agree that it really started in the 60s, with Spurs coming off their great peak of a few years before, Chelsea starting to build a cup-winning team, and hooliganism beginning to simmer in English football. Specifically, people point to the 1967 FA Cup final, the first ever to feature 2 London teams. It was known as the Cockney Cup final, and was also noteworthy for pockets of violence in and around Wembley Stadium. Spurs won it, with a team featuring 2 high-profile players, Jimmy Greaves and Terry Venables, who had started as youth with Chelsea. For Spurs fans, this was a reminder they were still the greater team. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you subscribe, you will be notified when we release a new video. It could be your firm we make a video about next, so don't miss out and hit the subscribe button. You can find me on Facebook or email me if you have a good story to tell. See you next time.